Hello, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Garibay, and I will be talking to you about Mexico, its culture, its history, and its impacts in the world today. A little overview of what I'll be talking about. I will first detail out the conquest of Mexico, then I'll fast forward to the independence, and after that, I'll fast forward again and start talking about socioeconomic data and demographic data to give you guys a better understanding of what Mexico is and the people in Mexico. And then to kind of close it off, I will talk a little bit about the culture in my country. So, Mexico was conquered by the Spaniards, who were ordered by Diego Velazquez to explore farther west um, at the beginning of the 1570s, which led to the Spanish fleet landing in the peninsula of Yucatan in the year 1517. However, after having been in the Caribbean where they met no strong opposing force, they were not expecting the Aztecs and their battle and sheer numbers, so they were pushed back and forced to retreat and leave. Having learned from his mistakes, Diego Velazquez sends Hernan Cortes back to Mexico, who arrives in the year 1518. Hernan Cortes, a very talented military man, arrives in Cozumel, where by just chance and luck, he finds a Spanish soldier who had been prisoner of the previous expedition and rescues him. This gives him an automatic advantage when dealing with the Aztecs because the year that this soldier spent in Mexico granted him the knowledge of the language and gave Hernan Cortes the ability to understand what the inhabitants of Mexico wanted and were saying. So Hernan Cortes continues going deeper into Mexico and starts getting into battles, the battles of conquest. And one of the first battles he wins and he has is the Battle of Tabasco. Um, After this battle, Hernan Cortes gets prisoners of war. He gets 20 slaves, one of which was Malencin. Malencin, later known as La Malinche in history, becomes Hernan Cortes's wife. And with the knowledge of the different languages that Aztecs spoke, helps Hernan Cortes create alliances with oppressed villages. These oppressed villages were under the rule of the Aztecs. They had to pay taxes, they had to provide food, and some of them were not really happy with the arrangements that were going on. So, at the opportunity of overthrowing the Aztecs, they joined with the Spanish fleet against them. It is no mystery that Spain won the war and conquered Mexico. One of the big reasons why this conquest happened was actually germ warfare. So, what the Spanish brought with them, aside from better weapons and horses, was their germs. Many diseases that were not present in the Americas were brought by the Spaniards and killed almost half the populations of the Aztecs. Because they had come and then left, and it was a whole year between that time, the diseases had actually had time to spread. So Cortes goes into battle in the capital Tenochtitlan and actually captures Moctezuma. Moctezuma was the ruler of the Aztecs at the time. Because of this capture, the Aztecs try to bargain with him. They give him their resources, their gold, and at the end, Moctezuma is killed. There's a rebellion from the Aztecs, and the Spaniards win, which leads to the final capture of Tenochtitlan and to the Spaniards officially conquering Mexico. Fast forward almost 300 years, and we arrive to what we're going to call the period of independence. Um, This period begins with the Battle of Puebla in May 5th, 1808, where the Mexican army won a battle with the French. Um, However, this battle they win May 5th, but a few days later the French come back and actually exact their revenge. With this, um, the people hurt and having fought a battle and a war that they felt had no part in their culture, the desire for independence grows. This happens because Mexico, or New Spain as it was called then, realizes that Spain is preoccupied with Napoleon's invasion, and because of this preoccupation that Spain has, they weren't really paying attention or providing resources to Mexico as they should. And Mexicans knew that the weakness that they had right now was something that they had to take advantage of. So the fight for independence we can separate into four different stages that spanned around 11 years. The four stages that we can separate them into is the Grito de Dolores, the Battle of San Diego Fort, the death of Jose Maria, and then the actual final battle and winning of the war. The independence movement officially begins with the Grito de Dolores, which occurred on September 16th, 1810, and was carried out by Miguel Hidalgo. Miguel Hidalgo was a friar who stood and yelled, "Long live Our Lady of Guadalupe, death to bad government, and death to Gachupines." Breaking down that phrase, the Lady of Guadalupe was the Indian symbol of Indians' faith, and Gachupines is the Spaniards. The movement began with 100,000 men, and although it had backing in the country, it was a lot of passion. Miguel Hidalgo fought with a lot of passion, but he had little to no planning. However, Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon comes in and, being a decorated and good tactician, wins the Battle of San Diego's Fort. With this win, it marks the beginning of Mexico's army winning the war. It's kind of like the tipping point where they begin to actually get supporters, get belief that they can do this, and start winning more and more battles. However, um, Morelos y Pavon dies in 1821, which is 10 years after the initial independence movement began. And this death actually creates a vacuum of power, which leads to confusion in the Mexican army. And very intelligently, the Spanish army regains control of the war, of the battle, and to all but very few wins the war. I mean very few because Vicente Guerrero and some other factions actually kept fighting and kept rooting for independence. Then Vicente Guerrero, um, very intelligently, looks for the help of Agustin de Iturbide. Agustin de Iturbide was a Spanish official who decided to leave the Spanish army and join the Mexican one. They go to the capital, and at the end of a very arduous battle, they win and declare independence for Mexico. The independence was actually in the late 1821, where they signed the Treaty of Cordoba, which basically established Mexico to be an independent constitutional monarchy who was going to be led by Agustin de Iturbide. So fast forward again approximately 200 years, and we get to Mexico of today. The current president of Mexico is Enrique Peña Nieto, although elections just passed in Mexico and there's a new president that's going to take charge in December. His name is Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The president in Mexico is both head of state and head of power, and the government is very similar or arranged very similar to the United States with three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. Mexico has 31 states, with its capital being Mexico City, which you can see in the map in green, and it says Estado de Mexico. And an interesting fact is that the president can only serve one 6-year term. There are currently many political parties in Mexico, but one party, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, actually kept control of the Mexican government throughout most of the 20th century. So, as of right now, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who won the election, has Mexicans worried, and it's not just because of him. It's a mix of him being a socialist president, who's elected in 2018, and Mexicans are worried when comparing with socialist presidents in other countries and Latin American countries. However, AMLO, as they call him, promised to end corruption, and he had a very strong platform behind corruption. So this bolted him forward and let him win the elections. On the other side, right now, Enrique Peña Nieto has had very strong encounters with Trump, the Trump administration, and with Canada. There was an agreement, a trade agreement between these three countries called NAFTA, which was disbanded and actually canceled earlier this year due to some of the Trump's decisions. And later on, it was replaced with the USMCA, which details a little bit of change between the trade agreement and tax regulations, but it goes along the same lines, providing access to free trade between Mexico, US, and Canada. That leads us to the economic aspect of Mexico. To give you a little bit of comparison, $1 becomes or is equivalent to 20.11 Mexican pesos. The average income in Mexico is $10,116 per year. However, this average income is actually skewed because there's a lot of people that don't work within the economy. And by within the economy, I mean there's a lot of service people. As you can see, it's 64.5% that do not register themselves. They don't pay taxes, which leads to skewed statistic on what the average income is. Because of this, 53% of the population is considered poor by the UN, and of this 53, 24% are actually considered extremely poor. Some of the big factors there are causing this amount of population being poor or having very little resources are drug cartels and corrupt police, which demand a higher investment by the government to deal with, which takes away some of the funds that you could have for social aid or for education, which leads to the second point, where it's lack of educational focus in Mexico. Many of the schools don't have the resources or the means to provide students with safe and clean learning experiences. Which leads us to health. The average age expectancy of males in Mexico is 78.5 years, and for females is 72.6, with the three top causes of death being heart disease, kidney disease, and diabetes. An interesting fact, and not a great one, but not as bad as other countries, is that Mexico's in between the 60th and 70th percentile in healthcare access. This somewhat high access to healthcare is due to Seguro Popular, which is a public health care system, being paired with the Institute of Social Security's healthcare, which The Institute of Social Security provides healthcare through wage taxes, and Seguro Popular provides healthcare to people that don't have steady income. And although their access is there, people with resources actually tend to go to expensive private healthcare programs just because they feel and think that there's a better service associated with them. Ending the presentation with culture is something important. Mexico is a country filled with many different cultural um, traditions, many different types of dishes, food, music. Um, about 6% of the population speaks non-Spanish native, either Mayan or Nahuatl, but there's actually very many different languages spoken throughout Mexico. 82% of the population is Catholic. This is one of the things that were left by the Spanish conquest and by the Spanish rule in Mexico and throughout the whole Latin America. Because of this and because of how Mexicans are raised, family values are very strongly imbued in the culture. Um, this means that family always comes first, and it's actually a very Latin thing that you can see throughout Latin families is that the care for their family is very important. With that, I close with the Day of the Dead celebration, which is a very known holiday lately throughout the whole United States, thanks to the movie Coco. It's actually a day where we celebrate our previous family members, our ancestors, and we bring them food and offerings to keep them with us for longer. In conclusion, Mexico's history has been long and hard, but it's a history that Mexicans are proud of. The growth of the country, of its economic resources, of its services is expected and desired, and although it might not come soon, it's something that will happen. Um, as mentioned, Mexico's climate in the terms of politics is very tense right now. Andrés Manuel López Obrador comes into power at the beginning of next year, and everyone's waiting to see if he will follow through with his promises. Um, and Mexico is a very diverse country with a lot of culture, a lot of history, and we're happy to welcome anyone that wants to learn more about the country. Viva Mexico, and thank you for listening.